everyone, welcome back to Museum Greg Reads. My name's Elizabeth, and today we're gonna wrap up the 2023 holiday season. So occasionally you might see a tail. That is my 13-year-old cat Lilu, who's decided that now's a great time to cuddle with mom. So last time that I updated you on my reading, it was mid-November, and it had been a little while since I had updated you. Apologies for the scurrying noises. That is my 9-month-old kitten running about, which explains why my 13-year-old cat is in my lap to avoid the 8-month-old kitten and his shenanigans. So I went ahead and updated you guys all the way up through mid-November, which was a little bit silly on my part. I just wanted to talk about some of my November books immediately because I still kept reading in November. So today we're going to have like latter half of November into December wrap up, which I'm calling holiday wrap up because it's essentially Thanksgiving through the New Year. Are we tracking? Because that's how my brain is working. Also, for full disclosure, this is the second time that I filmed this. I have a new tripod and I was trying to do something with it and I ended up like filming myself from here up and you couldn't see the books and you couldn't see me. So I'm refilming it all, but I unfortunately have already put all the books away and it's a lazy Sunday and I don't want to go grab them all again. So I'm going to make my life a little bit harder in editing by putting all the book covers up here instead of physically holding them up for you because that's just who I need to be as a person today. So to make sure I don't miss anything today, I'm going to pull out my handy dandy reading journal to make sure I'm tracking all of the books. I know last time I did a big wrap up, I went in order of rating and that was really fun, but I kind of can't put my head around that right now. I'm actually feeling kind of under the weather, so I'm just going to do this in the order in which I read them, so I hope that that is okay with you guys. It's the best way for my brain and my tracker to go through what we're talking about today. First up, it's going to be Trick Shot. Now, I sadly cannot remember this author's name, and I did not print out the book cover for this one in my journal, so failure on my journal's part right off the bat. If the angle has changed, it's his fault. Oh, buddy. I just want to run around and knock the tripod over, huh? So let's try this again. Trick Shot is a fun polyamorous novella that features a woman who is stranded at an airport for the holidays and she happens to meet who she thinks is a famous hockey player, only it turns out it's his twin. And he, out of the kindness of his heart, brings her home with him to his apartment with his roommate and occasional lover. And the two gentlemen show her a night she probably won't forget anytime soon, only they all start catching feels and he's lying to her. And while I enjoyed this one and I enjoyed true polyamory in my smut, the thing that kind of irked me is how long the lie was continued on. So that drug it down probably to like a 3.5, 3.25, where it could have been much higher for me. It just got a little irritating. But I am excited about the next novella in this series, which comes out for Valentine's, and I believe it actually features the famous brother and possibly her sister. So that's curious, and I'm interested in seeing where that goes. Next up is Spoiler Alert, which was very kindly gifted to me by Christine and Mo from the Roomies Digest for my birthday. I've heard good things about this one and the fat representation and loved it. I'm not going to discount that I loved it, but what I will say is that it felt like you were reading AO3 fiction about a fandom that you aren't in, but it's still written by a good author, so you're continuing on even though it's like all vibes for you, right? Have you ever done that? I've done that. Hell, that's how I end up in the Teen Wolf fandom. I barely watched that show because Tumblr lied to me about what that show was about. Anyway, it is very much fandom centric. It is about a fan of a Game of Thrones style TV show who is plus size and has been writing fan fiction within a community about this show. And her primary beta reader and friend is none other than the show's star, but she doesn't know it. And without him knowing who she is, she posted a cosplay on Twitter that got the trolls' jaws a-flappin', and he comes out in defense of this unknown woman and invites her on a date to show that her body is not the problem. And then they fall in love and kiss. Mwah. The real highlight of this one, on top of like their romance, was actually one of his co-stars who discovers fan fiction and just goes feral for it. The cats are chasing each other. Goes feral for it in a way that was just pure enjoyment for me. So he's the star of the next book, and I'm really excited to see where that one goes. Next up, here's come here. You're in mom jail. Next up, we have a trio of books over here that unintentionally formed a very themed and color coordinated section of my reading for the year. He's out of jail now. Not only color coordinate, but they all deal with creatures of legend and folklore. I started with Bad Creek. I'm not going to tell you which creature of folklore is featured in this because it was a surprise to me. It was not part of the synopsis, and it was a wonderful surprise because it's a creature that has captivated me for a good chunk of my life. It sparks my fancy. Anyway, Jessica Johns, who wrote this, is an Indigenous Canadian author. I picked this up for Reading Indigenous Authors Sprints with Lauren from Happy Haunts Library, and this was beautiful. This is about a young Indigenous girl who has suffered some tragedies in her family. She's lost her grandmother, who was the matriarch, and a sister. Sorry, the cats. Man, they're not gonna let me do this. She's having dreams about her sister who has passed. Only the dreams are starting to bleed into reality. When we first come to her, she is waking up from a dream with the head of a crow still in her hands in the real world. And so she's trying to understand what these dreams are trying to tell her, how to keep herself safe because they're getting more and more violent. Okay, back in air jail. And trying to reconnect with the women in her family who she has pulled away from in her grief. So this is truly a story about the female relationships in your life, the importance of family, the ups and downs of grief, and community. At its core, it's about community and what that means. So this was beautiful. This was a 5-star read for me. I will say it's not like bloody, gory, scary horror, so it's more thoughtful, suspenseful, made me tear up because of the emotional weight of some of these relationships. So that's my 2 cents about it. Again, the cats are fighting and the camera's moving, so I apologize for how many times that the angle is going to change on this. Next up is a book that's been on my radar for a long time. In fact, I had it physically on my shelf, but as we were talking about cryptids and creatures of folklore during these sprints, Lauren mentioned how much she enjoyed Devolution by Max Brooks. Now, I think Max is a brilliant author, but I can't do zombies, which is why this one really stood out to me, and why I've been wanting to read it. Only Lauren's recommendation was that I needed to do it on audio. I'm not the biggest audio reader, but this was immediately available at my library, so I went ahead and picked it up, and she was right. The way to do this is on audio. Also, the way to do this is fairly blind. What you need to know is this is mixed media about a Sasquatch massacre. So you're getting this told from the perspective of diaries, from interviews, from the perspective of the researcher, and it is absolutely fabulous if you go in without reading the full synopsis. Friends I've had who have read the full synopsis have said it was less enjoyable for them, so take that with a grain of salt. The thing that I really love about Max Brooks is that he's the son of Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft. So he is the son of a very, very famous comedian who I grew up with my whole life. And here he is writing zombie and Bigfoot horror novels. Anyway, this one was so fun to watch it unfold. The audiobook was primarily starring Judy Greer, which the best performance I've ever seen from Judy Greer. So I had a great time with my Bigfoot cryptid. And the third book in my red-white cryptid reading extravaganza was A Death in Door County by Annalise Ryan. This one's not a horror at all. This is a cozy mystery set in Michigan. And our investigator is a young woman who owns an oddities store where they sell grimoires and herbs and all sorts of strange things that individuals might need. But she is approached by the detective of a nearby community to be an outside consultant on a series of deaths that they have discovered that at initial investigation look like accidents, only he thinks they might be tied to a lake monster. Think Nessie. Only this particular lake of the Great Lakes has no history of Nessie-like creatures being sighted. This isn't Champlain where you've got Champy. This is new territory, right? And so he's coming to her because she is the child of two very famous cryptid hunters. But at her core, she is a skeptic. So it's her investigation to try to figure out, is this something to do with the lake monster, or is something else going on? Are these even murders? And I really enjoyed it. This was probably, well, the other two were 5 stars for me. This one was probably more of a 4-star read because this one had all of those cozy feels. It had this teeny tiny touch of romance. It felt a little Scooby-Doo-esque. It even had a big dog. I really enjoyed it. I'm probably going to pick up her next book in this series, which does feature Bigfoot. So I'm going to go back into my Sasquatch lane with that one. But lake monsters are kind of my jam. I firmly believe that everybody has a pet cryptid. Like, everybody has a conspiracy theory that they believe in, at least a little bit, like, oh, that could possibly be a thing. I think that people also, whether they know it or not, have a pet cryptid in their brain. Like, oh, I wish that that could be real, or I could see the plausibility of that sort of thing. Nessie's mine. I would love to believe that Nessie was real. I don't know why, but I do. And so that is the end of November, and we're going to move into December and all of our fun and games with the Reindeer Readathon. We're going to go through this in the same order that I read them in, not necessarily in the prompt list, so bear with me. First up on this, I read Ghost from the Grand Banks by Arthur C. Clarke. I've been on a mission to read the gaps in his catalog that I missed when I was in the heyday of my Arthur C. Clarke era, which was high school, and this was one of them. I remember my best friend in high school reading this one and thinking, oh, I'll borrow that from him, and never getting to it. This one felt wholly appropriate for 2023 because of some of the current events of the year, because Ghost from the Grand Banks is about 3 billionaires. The future of 2014, this was written in the early 90s, I want to say. Anyway, these 3 billionaires are trying to raise the Titanic. And chaos ensues. So with everything that happened around the Titanic in 2023, this felt like the right time to read this. And Arthur C. Clarke is the reason why I read a lot of very science-forward sci-fi. Between him and Michael Crichton, that's where I really cut my teeth. But what I wasn't expecting from this is that this was math forward, not science forward, math forward, really complicated conversations around math that I truly struggled with. And then on top of that, the whole first half of this book is actually the prelude. And that's just where we're meeting some of the key players. And some of those players aren't actually key because you don't really see much of them in the rest of the book. So it was really fatiguing, and there were times where I almost put it down. The end was pretty poetic and slightly prophetic for the reality of what we saw in 2023. The thing that I really enjoyed is once we started encountering the Titanic, well after the halfway point, there were some interesting conversations about what we would find when we explore the Titanic. And I say that because with this being written in the early 90s, I think like 1991, we'd only just found the resting place of the Titanic in the mid 80s. So we really hadn't explored much. So that was pretty interesting to see what he thought could be below the surface of the waves, right? And what technology he thought we were going to have by 2014 to explore something at that depth. This was a slog. The math of it all definitely kept this out of 3. This is probably one of my worst experiences with an Arthur C. Clarke book, and that's really sad for me. But still glad I read it. Anyway, I read this one for the Prancer prompt, and that is to read a book set in a place where you have never been. I have never been to the Grand Banks. I have certainly never been to the Titanic, and I am never going there. So it felt like a nice little tongue-in-cheek way of fulfilling that prompt. Next up, I tackled the Blitzen prompt, and this was to use a dice or a random number generator to get a number, and from that number, that was the minimum page count you needed to read. So if you rolled a 6, you would need to read a 600-page book. If you rolled a 1, a 100-page book, right? I was blessed and highly favored, so I rolled a 2, which meant I needed a 200-page minimum book. But I decided that this was going to be what gave me my first foray into the world of Grady Hendrix. I have a few of his books that I've picked up over the years, and I've read none of them. But the one that has most intrigued me, and the one that I picked up first, was Horror Store. This one hilariously looks like an IKEA catalog because it is set in a knockoff IKEA. In a universe that has IKEAs, mind you, they know that they are a knockoff. So this is billed as a haunted house story in a retail environment, and it gave exactly that. We're following a handful of employees who are staying overnight to figure out why weird pranks and acts of vandalism are happening in their store overnight, and things go horribly awry very quickly. And the thing that I really enjoyed about this, beyond the tongue-in-cheek of the IKEA catalog design, like read it physically, do not miss out on the slowly devolving mess of this catalog, but really it felt like the beginning of an episode of Supernatural. Now stay with me, because it felt like all of the crap that was happening before the title card would show up and the boys would arrive, before Sam found it on his computer using Alta Vista or LexisNexis, and they would ride off into the sunset. Like, at the end of this story, I could practically hear the Impala driving up into the parking lot. This is definitely a 4-star. I had a great time. I get that a lot of people are very anti-Grady Hendrix, and I'm coming at this with only one book in the coffer, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the next Grady Hendrix I pick up because of this experience. But sound off if I'm setting myself up for disappointment. Then from there, we're going to go into my book club pick for the month, and that was A Benny Song by P. Djeli Clark. I loved A Master of Jinn, and I know I'm not the biggest middle grade reader, but this one was so utterly disappointing. Like, I want to give this one like a 2.5, and I feel really badly about it. But the reason why this was so disappointing, and everything that was happening in this story, I could directly relate to something else that I have read. It just felt like a complete mismatch of everything that has been happening in the African folklore fantasy for the last 3 years, with a little bit of the Odyssey thrown in for good measure. So it just didn't feel very original. I could pretty much guess what was coming next. I'm not going to read the second book in this series. I think this is probably really great for somebody who is truly a middle grade reader, which I obviously am not, or somebody who's looking to start dabbling in this area of fantasy who doesn't have a lot of background in it. Because if you do have a lot of background in it, it's going to feel pretty well-traversed territory for you. Anyway, I read this one for the Dasher prompt, which was the big word search. Look for the first 5 words you spot, and you needed to use one of those words in the title of your book, so mine was song. Next, we have my last book in the Bergman Brothers series until the new one comes out in April, and that was If Only You, which is Ziggy's story. I read this one for Cupid, haha, Cupid, but it was to read a book with more than one POV, and of course I'm picking the queen of dual POV romances, Chloe Leese. I really, really enjoyed this one. This one was definitely a 5-star. I think one of the reasons I loved this one so much is because of how much it overlapped with Ren and Frankie, because they are ultimately my favorite couple of the group, mostly because Ren is my favorite of the Bergmans so far. I think Vigo is set to enthrone him. But we had all of the protective older brother aspects and protective friend, because he has a vested interest in both of these parties. I'm not even giving you a good synopsis of this before I'm just talking about Ren. This tracks. We enter this story where little sister Ziggy is now playing soccer professionally, and she has a very goody two-shoes image, both publicly and still within her family. She is still the baby sister, and she is still the sister that needed protecting, and she is desperate to kind of rough up the edges of her persona, both publicly and with her friends and family. So she goes and approaches one of Ren's teammates, who is known for being a little bit of a bad boy, who needs to clean up his image publicly, and says, hey, let's pretend to be friends publicly so that we can benefit from each other. And of course, sparks fly. Why would we even be here if they weren't? So, like I said, I really enjoyed the interactions with Ren. We get a resurgence of the Shakespeare Club, and we get to see all of the various characters who have joined the Shakespeare Club, because we actually get to go to the Shakespeare Club in this one. I love it. We don't just get to hear about it, we get to go to it. And I'm obsessed. So I'm really excited about the last book in the series coming out, but I'm also really sad that the last book in the series is coming out. Then we have Dancer Prompt, which is to read a book with 5 words in the title. And for that, I chose Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Centeno. And I also chose to do this on audio because I could count it for one of my bonus prompts. Which one of them is the audio one? I do not remember. But this was read by Eunice Wong. So if you remember my plans, my TBR video, I specifically called out that for my audio read, I wanted to find something that Eunice had read. I discovered Eunice Wong as a narrator at the start of this year with an arc for Rubicon, and quickly became obsessed. I often struggle with audiobooks because of the narration, and she makes it such a beautifully smooth journey. It feels lived in whenever she's reading something in a way that I find so immediately engaging. She's gotten a lot of buzz specifically for her narration of Vera Wong, so it was pretty high up on my list. It had 5 words in the title. Why not go for it? And I can honestly tell you, if I had not done this on audio, I would have very much given up before the halfway point. I think Vera is written very intentionally as an overbearing character that is hard to love. She is a woman who is a Chinese immigrant, who is a business owner who has lost her husband, has one son who is disconnected from her, and is struggling to come to grips with the differences in how young people, even of her own culture, live and exist within the American system. So she's very particular. She has very strong opinions. She can be quite abrasive, especially in the first half of this book. But there's something about the way that Eunice was delivering Vera and the other cast of characters, because we get to be in everybody's heads in this story, that really kept me going to the point where Vera went from overbearing to endearing. And by the end, you love Vera. I love Vera. I want more Vera. This story starts with Vera, who owns a tea shop in Chinatown that is very much struggling. And she comes downstairs one morning to find a man has died in her tea shop. And she watches a lot of crime shows, so she knows how these things are supposed to go. But after they come and visit and they start their investigation, she's immediately of the opinion that they are not doing enough. So as different people start coming to her shop that she's never seen before, she's starting to put puzzle pieces together. And she's launching her own investigation, somewhat illegally at times, to try to figure out what exactly happened to this very bad man, as she calls him. This is like meddling grandma to the nth degree, and I loved every second of it. So 5 stars for Vera Wong and 6 stars for Eunice. So definitely do this on audio. Next up, I went with Rudolph, which was to either read a book written before you were born or read a book written in 2023. And I used this as my opportunity to pick up Heartstopper Volume 5, which had just released in December. If you have not heard of Heartstopper, are you living under a rock? This is a sweet graphic novel about queer youth in England coming to understand themselves and find love. And in this one, we find Charlie and Nick at the cusp of a major transition because Nick is getting ready to graduate. And what is that going to do with their relationship? Also, they have been together for a little while. They are having conversations around intimacy, both with each other and with their friends. And I think that this one was really well done. I also thought that this was going to be the last book in the series, but she shocked us at the end of this one and said that a book 6 is going to be the last one. I'm very excited to see where that goes. I'm not going to say too much more because it's book 5 in a series and I don't want to spoil anything. Can you spoil anything for Heartstopper? Anyway, I was smiling, kicking my feet, having the best time. Next up, we have This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is by 2 authors whose names I do not have written down in front of me, and I am so sorry about that. But I used this for both Donner, which is 2 or more animals on the cover, as well as my ebook prompt. I am obsessed with the writing style on this one. It was beautiful and poetic and felt like you were getting wrapped up in it in a very fun way. Big grand sci-fi it was not, but a beautifully complex lyrical romance it definitely was. We're following 2 operatives from different sides of the Time War who are traveling up and down the thread of time. So they're going through timelines and either screwing things up for the other side or fixing things the other side has messed up. And Red and Blue, as they call each other, connect and start writing letters to each other that are vaguely untraceable by their superiors. And through these very non-traditional letters, find love with each other, and it was just beautiful. I don't know that this was a 5-star read for me, but it was definitely a 4. I would be very interested to see more from both of these authors, but also these authors together. Can they do something together again? Because I loved this. Then we have my chunk, my big chunk for the read, and that was Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I used this for the prompt Vixen, which is a book that you have been putting off. People have been telling me to read this since it came out. I knew it was going to be a series, and so I've been dragging my heels because I wanted to wait until it was all out, because I knew these were big chunky books. I knew I was going to get invested in them, and I held off for a long time. But the last book in the series came out in 2023, and my excuses are over with. So I used this for both, obviously, Vixen and for the 500-page bonus prompt, because this one's like 600 and some change. Anyway, I think when I first updated you guys on my TBR, I told you that this was, going to a terraformed planet and figuring out that there were sentient spiders, which it was. But there's so much more to it than that. It was really about the destruction of human civilization. This story spans thousands of years from both human and spider perspectives, and you bounce between human and spider perspectives, multiple humans and this multiple generations of spiders. But essentially, we go into this story where a scientist is running an experiment. She's been terraforming planets, but also seeding them with a virus that helps advance mammal species. Like, it supercharges their development. And so she's intending on kicking off all of these planets, putting a bunch of monkeys on them, getting one person to orbit the planet until the monkeys can't communicate it back to this satellite, at which point the human's going to come down and be monkey god, I guess? I don't know. But the human's going to come down from the satellite and engage with these monkeys. Only before they could seed the planet with the monkeys, an intergalactic uprising is happening. There is a rebel force that is toppling human civilization across the board, and one of those people is the person who is supposed to be in the little satellite for this planet, and he destroys the mothership, and our scientist ends up in the satellite by herself with no monkeys on the planet. Fast forward thousands of years in the future, we have a new group of humans who have had to rebuild from the utter decimation of their technology and history from this uprising. So they've had to cobble together what they could from ancient knowledge, build their own information, and they've created an ark ship where people are in long-term stasis trying to find a place where they can live, because none of the human colonies or Earth are habitable anymore when they come across this planet. And that's where the spiders come in, and the crazed human AI and all sorts of other things. Like, we've there's just so much that is happening in this story, and I loved it. It was so weird and wonderful, and there were so many perspectives that at first it was a little jarring bouncing between them. But the thing that I loved the most was I got to be a spider. I got to be multiple spiders through multiple generations. Spiders in space apparently are a thing that I just really love, but it felt so truly alien to be in the minds of Portia, Bianca, and I'm not going to remember the name of the boy spider, but I loved the boy spider. Every iteration of the boy spider had my whole heart. I guess if you are very anti-spider, you're probably not going to enjoy this book, but I truly loved getting to be in such a strange and funky and wonderful perspective, and to watch them go from essentially cavemen to the space age. It was just wild, and I'm so excited for more of this. So stay tuned, because this is one of the series that I want to focus on finishing in 2024. Then we had my last book of the normal prompts, and that was A Cosmic Kind of Love by Samantha Young. I read this one for Comet, which was to read a book that starts with your star sign, the same letter as your star sign. So I'm a Cancer. See, why did I not just do Children of Time? Don't know why I didn't just do that. Anyway, Cosmic Kind of Love is a rom-com about a party planner who falls in love with an astronaut through video that he was sending to his now ex-girlfriend, who happens to be her client, while he was on the International Space Station. And she feels so guilty about watching these videos that she starts sending videos of her own to him through NASA that she thinks aren't getting to him. So she's using it kind of like a video diary, but they are getting to him, and he's interested too, and figures out a way for their paths to cross. It was going well until they actually got together. And she became the weirdest, whiniest, jealous girlfriend that I could not take. There were a ton of plot threads with their various family members that just kind of went nowhere, that took up a ton of time in this book. And then on top of it, I assume Samantha Young is a white woman. I did not do a lot of research into her. A lot of the conversation around the astronaut are that he is Hispanic, and he is known for being a Hispanic astronaut, but his family was not very well connected to their Hispanic heritage. His father wouldn't let them learn Spanish. He didn't know a lot about their family history, even though his father is a first-generation immigrant, and how that was a challenge for him. But a lot of it felt very disingenuous. Maybe because I live in a predominantly Hispanic community, it didn't feel authentic to me, and the hollow ring to it really detracted from that. Honestly, the longer I stay away from it, it's definitely the 2.5. I think it could have been really good, and it was not. Oh, that was disappointing, and it kind of immediately went into an unhaul pile for me. Then we come to our last prompt. I got to do Slaying It this year. When you've accomplished all of the prompts and all of the bonus prompts, you get to do Slaying It, which is a 50-point victory lap where you can pick any of the original prompts that you want to redo. And so for that, I redid the Rudolph prompt, which was to read a book either from 2023 or from before you were born, so that I could read the most recent Lore Olympus book. And while I love Greek mythology, I think these books are stunning. Everything is feeling so drawn out with this that the delay between each publication, plus the aggressive slow burn of all of these stories that they're threading in together, it's starting to really wear on me, and I'm not having as much fun as I want to with this story. And I don't know if the solution is to give up on it for a little while and come back when there's a ton of it, or just keep slogging through. I don't know. I think I might have a better time if I could just power through it all when it's done. I don't know, tell me, what do you think I should do? Should I give up on this for a little while? Should I keep slogging through? I've already pre-ordered the next book. I just don't know. I don't know why at this point. I want to see this beautiful art. I want to see them. The pining is beautiful, but it's just taking forever to get to a point for me. And I do have one more book in December that was not part of Reindeer Readathon that I do want to talk about, and that is Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Leese. This is a novella that she hilariously did as a Kobo original. It's honestly the first time I've thought about Kobo in years, which was, oh, I don't know, Microsoft's Kindle alternative, right? It's like the Zune of Kindles. So you can't get it on Kindle. You have to buy a paperback. It very much felt like Chloe Lisa's take on You've Got Mail, and I mean that in a very positive way. It was very cozy, very holiday, enemies to lovers. The thing that really kept it from being a 5-star read for me is that because it's a novella, she only gave us one perspective. We only lived in the female main character's head, and that was very jarring for me in a way I wasn't expecting because I'm so used to both perspectives from Chloe's works. It was a bit of an adjustment for me, but I had a good time with it. I was supposed to buddy read it with Sarah from Sarah's Shelves for Christmas Day, and I don't think she finished it till a couple days later, but she did start it with me on Christmas Day, and I finished it on Christmas Day. One of these days, she and I are going to actually sync up appropriately, and we are both going to buddy read something together at a similar pace, and we're both going to finish it. Because usually one of us bails on the other in some way, shape, or form. Or like gets really slow compared to the other. When we buddy read a book at the start of this year, she like zoomed out way ahead of me, which understandable. She was having a much better time with it than I was. And I kind of limped along behind her. When we buddy read The Martian, I finished it and she did not, because she was not having a good time, right? So I think the moral of the story is that we need to pick better buddy read titles at better times for both of us to buddy read, right? That's what I'm hearing. Anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling and talking your ear off and instead say thank you so much for sticking with me on the last month and a half of the year. If there are any titles in here that you enjoyed, tell me about it in the comments, or if you have a recommendation for me based off of any of these books that I read in November and December, I'd love to hear from you down below. If you enjoyed this, please consider hitting the like button. If you're not already and would like to be, please subscribe, and until next time, bye guys.